Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsession
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, it's Jackie Kashian. Welcome to the Dork Forest. I'm out in the world in New York City, dork foresting it. And, you know the websites, JackieKashian.com, dorkforest.com. Patrick Brady, he's going to fix this audio. It's a little echoey. Welcome to the world. Vilmos, he's fixing the website. Mike Rickberg just sang that song you heard. He'll sing again at the end. And as always, there's merch to be purchased at JackieKashian.com and a donation button. Knock yourselves out if you're enjoying the show. And that's about it. Let's get right to it. We have here Melora Creager and Mark Anderson, who, I don't know you guys. This is exciting to me. Mark I met because you're a contract writer dude.
Yeah.
And where there was some Delta Sky Miles talk.
That's right.
It was
more or less.
And so, yeah. And then you were like, I would like to be on the Dork Forest. I love Shakespeare, except for it wasn't written by Shakespeare. And you said, and this is my friend, Melora, who also likes Shakespeare, but it wasn't written by Shakespeare.
Yeah, and she's done a show.
And she's done a show about it.
I did a musically oriented program.
What is, tell me more. Tell me your website and then, and everything about it.
Well, I have a group called Rasputina, and we are rock cellists and singers. And I've had this group
I am in love. Yes.
Already?
Yes, already. I'm on board. Let's do this.
I've done this for about 20 years now, and we've made a lot of records, and we tour a lot, but it's just unclassifiable. So it's like
it's its own thing.
We're a beloved secret for our fans.
Oh,
you know, like a culty kind of thing.
Sure. I'm a well-kept secret myself in the world of stand-up comedy. So
is Bach, and so is Emily Dickinson, and that keeps me going.
Oh, that does keep you going. So it's spell Rasputina.
Rasputina.
And I will link it in the notes. And so you're in New York doing shows.
This is our first show we did with something very different, which is some music from the Renaissance by a composer named Thomas Weelkes, and it's magical music. You know, like Christmas, fa la la kind of stuff. But it's really intense music, and it's really unheard for over 400 years. People haven't listened to this music, and there's a lot of mystery to it, and it's related to Shakespeare and related to the Earl of Oxford. And it was a very exciting show last night, and there's a lot of visuals. It's kind of mixed with, we're like Renaissance Kiss doing rock cello madrigals.
Yes! That's
in a nutshell.
I like it. Wrapped up.
Kind of Elizabetherial, something like that. Yeah.
Elizabetherial. Oh, there's a T-shirt. There's a buzzword. That's so great. Okay, so this Earl of Oxford.
Who was he?
Right. Talk to me, Mark Anderson.
Well, okay, so where I come into the story, I guess, is I wrote a book, and it's called Shakespeare by Another Name, and that came out in 2005, and that is
it'll be in the notes.
That's kind of that'll be in the notes too, I'm sure. But that was kind of summarizing the case that has been around for almost a century, that this cat who was in the Elizabethan court, a court poet. People were talking about him. He was a brilliant writer, they said. He's written all these great plays, but we don't have any of them by him. His name is Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford.
Okay.
So he was kind of a member of the court.
Right.
But he was also, like Hamlet, he was also staging plays at court.
Okay, but no one has any record of his stuff?
That's essentially correct. There's some footnotes to that, but that's more or less correct.
It seems like he was eradicated from the records. Like his so many letters missing and the plays missing. And it seems like he was eradicated.
Yeah, not entirely though. And in fact, the traces of him that we have are so manifestly Shakespearean. And this brings in a much larger question that has been around for much longer, which is that people in the Elizabethan age, and so in the late 1500s, early 1600s, there was this there are all these rumors that that Shakespeare, the brand, the name on the title page, is some kind of a put-up job. I mean, there are people like Robert Greene who's writing this book called Green's Groats Worth of Wit, and he says this guy is basically a pretender. And Ben Jonson, this famous dramatist, writes this whole poem called On Poet Ape, and it seems like he's talking about somebody who's an actor who is pretending essentially to be this great writer. And it sounds a lot like Shakespeare. And so people have been saying, like Walt Whitman and Mark Twain, all these people throughout the years have been saying, you know what, Shakespeare, we got the wrong story, we've got the wrong guy. And in 1920 along came someone who said it's the Earl of Oxford.
Okay, in 1920, a guy said that it was
yeah, and so I just sat down in the early 2000s and I wrote his biography, cradle to grave, from the point of view, okay, if he were Shakespeare, this is what his life would have been. That's Shakespeare by another name, and that whole story.
That was the first real biography of de Vere.
Well, it was the first biography of de Vere as Shakespeare. There are sort of traditional biographies that set the Shakespeare question aside, or there's one that's kind of antithetical to it. But this was the first that just embraced it and, just ran with it. And what I found is page after page, paragraph after paragraph, his life was Shakespearean in every sense of the way, and I can go into that.
Really intense.
Right.
And I have strong feelings, and with my show, as an artist, an artist always writes about themselves and their psychology. And the songs I write, I never write about myself. They're historically based.
Okay.
But, I'm always in there because that's the only way you can make things.
Right. That's your perspective. It has to come from somewhere.
Yeah, it has to be in there. You can't just, as an artisan or a craftsman, make these things, which is how people take the historical William Shakespeare, that he was cranking out the plays, that he was, a Poet guy making incredible literature. Like, it doesn't work that way.
It doesn't compute that it just sort of the working class actor guy becomes.
But when you know about Edward de Vere's life, it's just like that's how art is made. His life was so intense. He's working out his psychology. That was his reality. Like, the bastardy, birthrights, betrayal, incest.
Right.
That was his reality, that he's, working it out, like all the stuff.
Right, all that inbreeding nobility business. I mean, that's where he came from, as opposed to where Shakespeare came. Right, and so then so where the guy that was Shakespeare, was that a real guy?
I would add to what Melora said that, like most people, I came up as a writer, thinking, okay, well, Shakespeare was Shakespeare, why would you question it, but I never felt a connection, to the works. It just felt like, this kind of abstract, monument, this abstract, thing that everybody knows and agrees. I mean, these are the greatest works in the English language, but I never really felt a personal connection to it because it always seemed so. There was never, it's not like he's writing from the perspective, like Hamlet is about ambition or Macbeth is about, Macbeth is about ambition or Hamlet is, like all these abstract concepts. No, writers write from personal experience and personal, like it's in their lives. And I didn't know it at the time when I was kind of getting started as a writer that there was this other point of view. But once I came upon it, it was like kind of a light bulb moment, like, oh, okay, well, it's true for Shakespeare too. I mean, you go into a writing class and the first day in class, what does the teacher tell you? Write what you know. Right. And that is what Oxfordians is the term of art for what we are.
Yes.
Earl of Oxford. So we say, he was the primary author behind these works. So this is what Oxfordians say is that it's true for Shakespeare too. Write what you know. So that for instance, so Shakespeare was an actor. He was a money broker. He was a money lender. But there's all this scuttlebutt at the time saying, well, he's kind of a fraud. Like this Poet Ape thing is saying.
Was he the fraud, or was he just a front for?
Or maybe a front might be a better, or might be a more appropriate term. I mean, like even in the as recently as like the 1950s, the blacklists in Hollywood, you had screenwriters like Dalton Trumbo who would hire frontmen to say that they wrote his screenplays, and in fact,
he was a communist.
Because he was blacklisted, and even like Roman Holiday, that Audrey Hepburn movie, he wrote the story for it, but he hired somebody else to say that they to take the credit. That person won an Academy Award.
Right.
And so,
Was
this
that
is...
person considered to be a bit of a May-December creepy writer?
Well, I don't know. I don't know the Dalton Trumbo story well enough to comment, but I'm just saying that frontmen have been used before.
Right. Sorry about that.
But I'm saying this has happened before
Right.
in recent history, and what the
Yes.
Oxfordians are saying is this happened also 400 years ago with the greatest works of English literature, and there are some very powerful reasons why
Was there speculation that okay, I have two questions. First of all, so William Shakespeare existed for reals.
Yes.
Okay. He was born of woman. What do we know about him? What do we know about his early days?
His generations of illiteracy are like a pretty key point to.
So he came from unlettered folk.
Yeah, although
and passed it down.
I would say no one can control who your parents are, but you can control what you do with your life. And so yeah, I mean, it seems like he was.
Was his dad a baker?
His dad was a glove maker, according to as far as we can tell.
And he was raised in London?
He was raised in Stratford-on-Avon.
Okay.
Born in 1564, and then supposedly moved to London in the 1590s. Although we don't really have a lot of records of his life. Mark Twain wrote a brilliant book called "Is Shakespeare Dead?" Mark Twain is another heretic, along with Whitman, who thinks we got the wrong guy.
Okay.
And Mark Twain, right? In fact, you can get it on Google Books. It was
what's it called?
1909 is when it came out, so it's copyright free at this point. It's called "Is Shakespeare Dead?" And it's very funny and classic Twain. And Twain just goes off about how silly this whole kind of Santa Claus myth that we've built up around Shakespeare is. And really, I mean, the documents of his life you can list in just a couple pages. And nothing
know about Shakespeare can be sort of a short litany. Just a very these are the 19 things that we know about William Shakespeare the man.
And many biographies that are written about him are mostly filling in with Elizabethan times were like this. Shakespeare's day was like this. It's like filler.
Well,
stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, well, as Twain said, Shakespeare is a brontosaur. He's 9 bones and 800 barrels of plaster of Paris.
Okay.
So
that's a great line.
Yeah.
That crazy Twain.
Yeah.
He was
really good.
Yeah, it turns out. Let's take a stand. I like
going on a limb.
So what about the Earl of Avon?
The Earl of Oxford. Yeah. Well, okay. So people like Twain, like Walt Whitman, there have been a number of writers and thinkers, and Sigmund Freud got into this. People who have just said, this just does not make sense what we have.
Right.
And then in 1920, this guy comes along. He's taught Shakespeare for a lifetime. And he just kind of did basically a forensic investigation into, okay, here we have the Shakespeare canon. The author is telling us about his life in his works. So what can we infer from the canon? And let's go back to the records and find the guy that is described in the canon. Yeah.
This author must have been, respected as a poet. He must have been, you must know the list of qualities. He had a specific list.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's a litany of about 20 points.
Yeah. He has to have this information. He has to have this life experience.
Yeah, very specific.
He has to have. Right.
And just to pick one specific example, there are about a dozen Shakespeare plays that are set in Italy. Okay. And Italian scholars have looked at some of these plays and said, wow, he seems to know our culture quite well. He seems to know the geography quite well, down to really, really arcane stuff.
Right.
Now, there are modern day critics who say, oh, well, Shakespeare didn't really know Italy because of this and that.
Okay.
But there's actually a recent book that came out I think it's called Shakespeare's Guide to Italy, where this guy went and he just traced every single Shakespearean reference Italian reference in Shakespeare. And he found almost without exception, it's the critics who are ignorant. And that Shakespeare got so many specific facts about Italy right. And the incredible thing is, it's not like he's portraying the whole region of Italy. There are very specific places. It's Verona and Venice and Naples and so on.
It's like where the courts are and where
Edward de Vere went on his trip.
That's the thing. That's the thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes, all right. Okay.
So it's basically like you can take push pins on a map and like, where is Shakespeare's Italy? That is essentially Edward de Vere's ports of call in his known Italian travels. He bought a house in Venice and he toured around Italy for the better part of a year.
Okay.
And all of his sort of stops and ports of call just happened to be the exact same places that Shakespeare portrays so convincingly in his Italian plays. That's one tiny example of what Orson Welles, another heretic, said. I think Oxford wrote Shakespeare. If you don't, there are some awful funny coincidences to explain away.
Okay.
And it's like there's nothing to support the historical William Shakespeare, and there's reams to support the Earl of Oxford.
Okay.
But it's like it's kind of a socially unacceptable position.
Yeah, you're going to get hate mail for this, Jackie.
No, I'll tell you something. I told people, I said, yeah, I'm going to talk to these people who think that the Earl of somebody wrote Shakespeare, and they're like, oh, I read about that. What are they? What's happening? And
it makes people feel weird. I've had responses where
some people are like, why do you care?
About it.
Yeah.
And something a lot of people say, and often it's actors, is like, it doesn't matter. We have the work. Well, it does matter because it gives it a lot of depth. This other fascinating guy rather than this boring guy. It does matter. And if it doesn't matter who wrote the greatest,
literature of the world,
then why do we read any biography of anyone? Like, it does matter.
Yeah. I mean, I think that there is a fascination with. I mean, do you think you can read Shakespeare and not care?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think, we can all appreciate Shakespeare, whoever he was, and we all do, in many ways. But what I think the Oxfordians are adding is this whole new layer and level where it's like, okay, if you go see Long Day's Journey into Night and you know nothing about Eugene O'Neill, you can still appreciate Long Day's Journey into Night. But when you realize, oh my God, this guy is portraying every intimate detail of his fucked up family, if I can. I think I can use that.
You can.
We're a family podcast.
My dad was heard that stuff.
Right. But I think she's a teenager. But she might have heard the word.
But there is a whole new level of that play that you can appreciate when you begin to learn about O'Neill.
Right.
And what Oxfordians are saying is that Shakespeare is, contrary to what most scholars are saying, was one of the most autobiographical authors, certainly of that age.
Right. It was. Yeah. It's sort of. I mean, when you read, I read a fair amount of science fiction. And you can take whatever world you have and stick it on another planet, but it's still going to be a reflection of whatever life you led or whatever things you think about.
Sure.
Because it can't be anything else.
Yeah, it's not denying an act of imagination.
Right.
I think people that might be bothered by this, to say that an artist puts himself in their thing, it's not denying imagination.
Right. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of fast. Here's what I'll be admitting. I have seen one Shakespeare, maybe three Shakespeare plays. And I've tried to read them and I've read none of the sonnets. And none of the poets.
The sonnets are my favorite.
They are. Okay.
I was never interested in Shakespeare, I think, because I couldn't get that human feeling. Like, I love biography. I love to just, if the person is fascinating, it does inform the stuff and make it really exciting. Shakespeare was just never interesting to me. But I did get really excited about this because I was just captivated by the Earl of Oxford and how it changed everything. And then I read the sonnets, and that was like, it was written yesterday. It's like a person just wrote it. There's nothing archaic.
Is it poetry?
Yeah, but it's...
Okay. Is it an
Can I give some examples?
Sure. Well, please give me examples.
Okay. So what Melora was saying, I think, is to me the real trump card of what the Oxfordians hold here. That we're not. again, we're not denying the universality of this, the imagination of this, but what we're saying is these are coming from a real deeply felt human place.
Right.
All of these poems, all of these plays, the sonnets, the epic poems, even the obscure stuff, you can essentially, for every play and poem, except for probably the Shakespeare history plays, which are on a different mission, they're kind of propagandizing the Tudor state. They're like, because essentially the Tudors came in. I'm going to go off on a little tear on the Tudors. the Tudors came in basically on a coup d'état. Like they overthrew the sitting king, Richard III. And how can you get away with that? Well, you've got to completely villainize the past administration to demonstrate that you're like, well, we're the rightful people. We should be ruling. England.
It's a Kissinger-like moment. I never went into Laos.
Yeah. So that's what the history plays are. That's part of the mission of the history plays is they're propagandizing the Tudor state, these thugs who came in and overthrew a sitting king.
Is there speculation that Shakespeare might have been written by several people because of that? I think
there's what's called the groupist theory, but to me, when I read, the whole canon, there is a single consciousness, sort of a single overriding perspective.
Ones?
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, I mean, there is a voice. There is and I would love to read actually a sample of de Vere's, a known letter of Edward de Vere, not as Shakespeare, but just a letter of Edward de Vere, just to give you a sense of his Shakespearean voice, which I'll do, which I'd be happy to do too.
Right. Well,
I wanted to give some examples. Okay.
I was just going to ask, what are, for people who, like myself, who do not know what obviously you must be speaking of Richard III.
Yeah, Richard III.
And what are the other historical plays?
So there's the Henrys, like Henry VI. There's Henry V, the famous one with the Battle of Agincourt and things like that. There's the Falstaff plays of the two Henry IV plays. There's a Richard II play and a Henry VIII and a King John, and that's essentially the whole history canon.
Okay.
So it's mostly about the Wars of the Roses with some other exceptions. But my point about the Shakespeare history plays is they are they are telling kind of national propaganda. And I think this is part of the reason why, and this is actually one of the most prominent question that I get when I talk about this subject is why, if let's just say de Vere actually wrote this stuff, why would he do it? Why would he hide behind this name? And my short answer is sex and politics, that he's writing about all of these powerful people and writing very damning and compromising things about them. So he has to kind
snarky.
of, yeah. I mean, it becomes, some of it is absolutely brilliant satire. But the reason that the Queen Elizabeth is the reigning monarch of his time, put up with it is that he also wrote brilliant propaganda for the state. And so it was
he started getting paid £1,000 a year at a very certain point. And it's like,
it's the money that came out of nowhere.
Elizabeth started giving him money at age 36, around the time when you start to see some of these history plays starting to pop up. Now, I think that it turns out that's somewhat complicated because he was downwardly mobile throughout his life. He was very born rich and just getting poorer and poorer because he ran through money like crazy.
It seems like he was making these plays for many years at a period earlier than what we think of William Shakespeare. Okay. And that, he was the entertainment guy for the court and making these plays. And it seems to me that they're earlier versions of what we know as the Great Shakespeare, that when he was older, he was, living in the suburbs, fine-tuning it, honing it, turning it into what we know as the great literature. Okay. But earlier, that these were the
drafts?
The entertainments, lighter things, or, earlier work. Right. And people also say, there's no early work for William Shakespeare. Well, it was probably these early versions that were done for the court. And I think that the music that I'm working with could have been the music for these plays.
So is this Earl of Oxford early work that is published?
No, this is
that you're talking about.
This is mysterious stuff.
This is still stuff that is uncredited, or it's credited to Shakespeare.
It doesn't exist.
We
don't have it.
Yeah, we have some of his early lyrics. I mean, we know that he wrote songs and things like that too. So we have some of his early lyrics, and some of them are good.
Talk that he wrote all the time. There's
people saying he's the greatest for comedy. People talking about it.
Yeah, back then.
Around him back then was saying, you gotta do this, but we don't have any hard copy. We don't have a sizable amount.
Yeah, I mean, there was kind of one book of commentary that was talking about a lot of the works coming out of court. This was kind of the golden age of pseudonyms and of kind of secret, concealed identities because there was so much political ferment at the time. It was so dangerous to write under your own name that a lot of people wrote anonymously and took pseudonyms. So De Vere wouldn't be the only one.
But Protestant Reformation right around then too?
Yeah, it was just before then. It was still boiling at that time.
Right, yeah.
It was big, and that was also another part of the reason why this was so dangerous, because Queen Elizabeth was basically, she had a fatwa on her head, essentially. Like the Catholic Church said you could go to heaven, do not pass go, do not collect $200 if you assassinate Queen Elizabeth, the heretic Queen Elizabeth. So
indulgences galore.
Yeah, no, I mean, it was, this is serious stuff. And there were real threats on her life. And you tread lightly in running against kind of the virgin queen mythology that they had put forward. Right. And yet the Shakespeare canon is portraying Elizabeth from an Oxfordian point of view as sometimes this rather desperate clawing vixen in Venus and Adonis, a practically pornographic poem. I mean, it's portraying her as this another desperate monarch, Cleopatra and Antony and Cleopatra. De Vere sat on the jury that tried Mary Queen of Scots and condemned her to death, but it was Elizabeth that signed the execution order. That's what's going on in Macbeth. She's got the blood of an anointed monarch on her hands. She is Lady Macbeth. And this is what the author is, he's accusing her.
So if she's Lady Macbeth, that's obviously not direct. Those other two things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
The pornographic poem.
Right, the pornographic. Is that by name? Is she said
No. She
is alluded to?
Yeah, I mean, Venus and Adonis, I mean, she is portrayed as the character Venus, and she is portrayed as the character Cleopatra, and I think, there are definitely overtones of Queen Elizabeth as the character Lady Macbeth and as Gertrude in Hamlet, but it doesn't end there. I mean, the whole court, all the power players in the Elizabethan state are being satirized, sometimes brutally, viciously, satirically in these works. And
so you could take the history tome, you could take the works and go, oh, well, this is Jim, and that's Larry, and that's Mary.
Absolutely.
And everyone at the time knew who it was. Like, oh, Mary, that was a...
Well, I think when you say everyone, I think everyone at court. I think it was kind of a polite secret, but then you have kind of these concentric circles of knowledge where people at the periphery of the court are starting to hint at, like probably the Lenny Bruce of the Elizabethan age, the satirist named Thomas Nashe. He's buddies with De Vere, and he writes all these, there's so many of these works they're talking about the Shakespeare controversy, but a lot of people are blind to it today because they don't have the key that unlocks the door.
Right.
Like once you start to realize, holy, these people are talking about this like crazy. Right. Thomas Nashe is a perfect example. Like his satires, he's constantly talking about De Vere. He dedicates a book to De Vere, but he doesn't say, I dedicate this book to my good friend Edward de Vere, Lord Great Chamberlain of England. He calls him Gentle Master William. And it's like there are all these references in this dedication where it's very clear it's the Earl of Oxford. He's talking about his heraldic crest and all these things that are very specific to Edward de Vere, Earl of Oxford. But he doesn't name him as Edward de Vere. He calls him Gentle Master William, wink, wink, nudge, nudge.
Okay.
So he's, in other words, calling de Vere Gentle Master William. Another poem, this poem called Willobie His Avisa or His Avisa, is joking about De Vere and his second wife. And again, very specific references where if you know these characters, it's like, oh, okay, yeah, they're actually lampooning De Vere and his wife.
Whatever, his first wife.
His first wife died in childbirth.
Oh.
Yeah, mysteriously. Yeah. There's plenty of that in the canon too. His first troubled marriage is all over the Shakespeare canon.
Okay.
But let me just finish the reference to this other poem. It's clear that De Vere is being satirized in his wife, but he's being named not as Edward de Vere or Earl of Oxford or any of that stuff. W.S. are the initials they refer to him.
In which play? In which book?
It's a poem called Willobie His Avisa.
Okay.
So Gentle Master William, W.S.
Sure.
Okay, we're starting to get a picture here.
Right. But and the thing is like I don't have a horse in this race. Right?
Understood.
It's I'm on board. I'm okay. And
the Dork Forest is a safe place,
it's the
right?
safest space in the world.
Safe space. That's it.
You want to knit a mile-long scarf? Do it. It's Diva Zappa's going to come on and talk about knitting. So I was like, yeah, I'm on board, but it is fascinating. So what are let's see, where are we at? Okay, we're at 30 minutes. So what I'm genuinely curious about kind of is your favorite, like what should I be reading? Like
Start with Hamlet.
Hamlet?
Hamlet is,
Hamlet has been assigned. I have read Hamlet.
Well, or just,
what
about Mark's book? That's what got me into the whole thing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
I saw the movie Anonymous. That's a big deal on the subject. And that's what really started me. And then the next thing I read was Mark's book. And I'll definitely.
Okay, so plug time. You can get Shakespeare by Another Name on Kindle. It's less than the price of a movie ticket, and you will be off into a whole new world.
Into a whole new world, and it probably has a reference to a million Shakespeare works.
Yeah.
Or the Earl of Oxfordian works. But that people can go into and read. I mean,
it gives you, I think from my perspective, that the Oxfordian kind of take on Shakespeare gives you a whole new Shakespeare.
Read the de Vere thing.
Okay. All right. So de Vere, we have some of his early poems. We have all these references to him as a playwright, but we don't have his plays. But we do have these letters that he wrote to his in-laws. His in-laws were the most powerful family in England. So he married.
Was raised as an orphan in the court by the Secretary of State.
Yeah, like the Queen was basically his stepmother.
From a child, he grew up.
Was he
there.
the first Earl of Oxford?
17th.
He was the oldest family in the land.
The oldest, like
the de Veres were the oldest family in the
well, the oldest. Let's say the oldest, the oldest
what happened to his parents?
noble lineage.
Yeah, no, I get it.
His father died mysteriously. We've got to admit, his father died mysteriously.
All right.
And then he came under control of the Queen and her Secretary of State, and grew up there as an ear to everything happening at the center.
Well, yeah, and I guess if I was talking about Hamlet, Hamlet is, in a very autobiographical canon, Hamlet is, I think, the most autobiographical. It is the most personal play. He was raised...
a spooky uncle.
He was a child prodigy, and I think he was like Elizabeth's pet, he was... hilarious,
like her favorite
one-liner, gorgeous kid.
Yeah.
He was...
the Queen was his stepmother.
Yeah. Okay.
The Queen was essentially his stepmother, but I think he also, there were times he was rumored to have an affair with Elizabeth. So there's your kind of Oedipal, relationship between Hamlet and the Queen.
30 years older than him.
But the thing is, the Polonius in Hamlet, the chief counselor of the Danish court, that was his father-in-law. That was also his his guardian.
And that character,
he married his guardian's daughter.
It's accepted by all different sides.
Yeah, it's pretty widely.
People accept that
it's been pretty widely argued.
Oh, okay.
That Polonius is based on this guy.
On that very man.
And it makes fun of him really bad.
Okay.
So, and of course, Polonius has a daughter. This guy had a daughter.
Reread me some Shakespeare.
And he married his stepfather, his Secretary of State foster father's daughter. Like, he was kind of forced to marry his stepsister.
Right.
And
then she died in childbirth, and then who did he marry after that? I wonder.
That
was just gossip.
Let's bring in another work while we're at it, right? Or let's bring in two. So he had a really rocky relationship. Like his first marriage was a train wreck.
He didn't want to marry his sister. He just didn't want to. Who does?
Who does? Nobody. I don't care if you're not actually related, but if you're raised as brother and sister, you're like creep factor 12.
Yeah. Well, okay. So he goes off to Italy. And he has these big, crazy adventures in Italy, and then he comes back, and his wife gives birth to a child when he's in Italy. Wait a second. Let's do the math here.
Was he gone over a year?
Well, that's the question. When was this girl born? Yeah. And so he doesn't know when he's coming back. Is this child mine? And he has a servant as he's coming home, and his servant is basically whispering in his ear, like, your wife has been she's cheated on you. This is not your child, and all this stuff. And he comes back, and it is another disaster where he is outraged, and it's just this court scandal.
Right.
This is this is the seeds of Othello, the jealous, the servant who is infecting, the main character with these intimations of jealousy.
An actual piece of paper where the father-in-law was like trying to do the math. This month, and like a piece of paper with the guy.
Othello or for reals?
The reals.
Secretary of State father-in-law. Like him trying to figure out the math backwards of like, okay, this date I told him she was pregnant and the baby was born here.
The thing is, he actually claimed before he left for Italy, he said, if my wife gives birth while I'm out of town, I wasn't the father.
Weird.
Because basically once he got into this marriage, I think he soon wanted out, but he couldn't get out for various reasons.
Tell her the whole bed trick thing.
Well, okay, so he comes back and
you guys are awesome.
He comes back.
I get like too excited.
Yeah. All right, now you go. And then, yeah. So he comes back and he says, "What the hell? You gave birth while I was out of the country. Who's the daddy?"
Right.
And she says, we slept together, but you were drunk and you didn't know it.
Oh my God.
Oh, really?
Hello, lots, children.
This is the bed trick is kind of the central plot device in the Shakespeare plays Measure for Measure and All's Well That Ends Well. That whole
have
crazy.
not done either of those.
Well, right. They're pretty. They're more obscure. Although I think Measure for Measure, it's one of my favorite plays.
Is it?
It's just an amazing.
Is it a comedy?
It's a tragic comedy, I suppose you could say.
Does everyone die at the end?
Not everyone. No.
Okay. That's.
But I would still stick with my original thing of Hamlet. Start with Hamlet.
We read Hamlet first.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. This is this may be a little self-serving, but get to know the Earl of Oxford first, and then I think you'll find it. The play starts to. There are new resonances that come in. But you wanted me to read a little bit of de Vere's letters. So we do have these letters that he wrote to his in-laws throughout his life. Now his in-laws are this kind of, by the books.
They were Puritans too. So
oh, really?
He was like glam arts and their, stuffy pants.
Right.
Yeah.
So shirts and
exactly.
Fine.
And so they, it was a rocky relationship from the get-go. So when he's writing these letters to his in-laws, it's not like he's going to compose these, these beautiful poems because it'll be completely lost on them. Nevertheless, this is a spontaneous composition near the end of his life. Queen Elizabeth dies in 1603, and he's writing to his brother-in-law, reflecting on
who is the new Secretary of State.
Right, who's
over from his father, and it's supposed to be very
okay.
All right. So here he is writing about and reflecting on the Elizabethan age, on the life and reign of Queen Elizabeth, who had just recently died.
Okay.
You see, he writes to his brother-in-law, de Vere says, "I cannot but find a great grief in myself to remember the mistress which we have lost, under whom both you and myself from our greenest years have been in a manner brought up. And although it hath pleased God, after an earthly kingdom, to take her up into a more permanent and heavenly state, wherein I do not doubt but she is crowned with glory, yet the long time which we spend in her service, we cannot look for so much left of our days as to bestow upon another. In this common shipwreck, mine is above all the rest, who least regarded, though often comforted, of all her followers, she hath left to try my fortune among the alterations of time and chance, either without sail, whereby to take advantage of any prosperous gale, or without anchor, to ride till the storm be overpast."
It's pretty.
That's
Shakespeare.
That's Edward de Vere writing to his brother-in-law.
Yeah.
You notice he's using the metaphors of tempest and prosperous gales in reference to the death of Queen Elizabeth. I think what's going on in The Tempest is it's this satirical reflection on the Elizabethan age. This rebellion that had just happened where somebody tried to overthrow the queen is sort of fantastically represented in The Tempest as this crazy little rebellion of these characters, Stefano, Trinculo, and Caliban. So you've got all of these Elizabethan kind of overtones to The Tempest. The Tempest is often said, I should add that the number one objection to the Oxfordian theory is that Edward de Vere died in 1604, and they say that many of these works were written after 1604.
Okay.
But that's actually, I think, on closer examination, this objection is actually it's actually an argument for the Earl of Oxford, because when you look at when these plays were written, like you look at what's the evidence for, The Tempest, what's the evidence for Macbeth, what's the evidence for King Lear, time and again, you keep running up against 1604. It's like everything shuts down after 1604. He stops referring to new works. He stops referring to contemporary events. He stops using sources.
So it's very much like Tupac. Like they're publishing stuff after.
Yeah.
Don't you think that's how the multiple authors theory gets started? Like, he died, and relatives or coworkers or people are still trying to finish his things or put it out. Or stuff's still going on, and that's how other hands can get
into the pot. Yeah. So I think the 1604 thing is another very strong argument for de Vere, because it's just this arbitrary line. Why does the Shakespeare factory just almost universally seem to shut down in 1604? Well, it's because the author stopped breathing.
Right. So when did William Shakespeare die?
1616, 12 years later.
Okay.
And he retired back home to his big house or whatever from his payola.
Yeah.
And didn't do anything. And that's also anti-artist. Like, at the peak of your powers, you're this kind of creator, and you just stop and never go back to London. And
Even John Lennon just took a couple of years off, and then he started writing again.
Yeah, you can't stop.
Yeah. Watching the wheels. But so did Shakespeare himself, to your knowledge? So he supposedly stopped writing in 1604 as well.
Well, okay.
No, stuff getting published. Stuff is published. Or
After 1604.
There's not that much knowledge about, nobody knows when something was written. You can't prove when anything was written.
Nope.
Because then it's performed, and they don't have that much record of the performance. Right. And then published is all they really have. But what is published? Something can be published at any time.
Right.
But it has to be written by that point, and so we have, have the publication record of these plays. Astonishingly, the Shakespeare, the Shakespeare factory is just churning out new plays, new poems in the 1590s and the early 1600s. And then 1604, there's another line in the sand. It's like, what happened? There are no new Shakespeare works that appear in print after 1604, with one exception. There's this brief window, 1608 to 1609, when de Vere's widow was selling their estate. And I think some stuff snuck out under the, sort of under the fence in 1608, 1609. But basically, the Shakespeare factory seems to have shut down in 1604, the year that Edward de Vere died.
How old was Edward de Vere when he died?
54.
How old was Shakespeare when he died?
Was it 56? Something like that.
Okay. Just curious.
Yeah.
And so the music I'm working with...
Oh, wait a second. No, 52. I'm sorry.
Okay.
The music I'm working with is similar with this time frame. And very similar to the William Shakespeare, fake guy front, in that it was supposedly written by a 20-year-old country boy, and it's...
This is this Thomas Weelkes guy,
Thomas
right?
Weelkes is the
How do you spell
composer's
Weelkes?
name. Weelkes.
Okay. And supposedly Thomas Weelkes wrote all of this music?
Yes, and there were only 3 collections of music that were published between 1597 and 1600. There's 60 songs, so it's a lot of material.
In 3 years?
In 3 years, a lot of material. It's really sophisticated music. And
full orchestra?
It's madrigals.
Okay.
So they're songs.
Define that. Okay.
Madrigals, they are like a small singing group, like 3, 4, 5, 6 voices.
But a cappella?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's a doo-wop.
Right. Doo-wop. Sweet.
And the lyrics are genius. They're at turns, funny or tragic. There's puns. There are actual Shakespeare references in the songs. Like Kiss Me Kate is one of them.
Okay.
And the subject matter is very sophisticated, about falconry and courtly love. And it's not a country teenager could not have written this music. He could not have gotten it published.
There was no cable. The equality of the information being disseminated was not universal. So
And it all happened at this time, 1597 to 1600. All this music was published, and there's lots of connections between the publisher and.
So these madrigals were unaccompanied.
Yeah.
Were they eventually accompanied? Like,
no,
are they?
There was some, and also you'd have to have access to fantastic musicians to be performing this work.
Okay.
And
so people are reading music when they're singing. I come from a marching band background, so I know that you can write music for voice. That's exactly what's happening. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. So
it's a small group, and but people in the court, they had their own little singing group.
Okay.
Edward de Vere had a tumbling group, a boys' theater group. Like, this is what you had. You didn't have cable, so you had your tumblers.
Right. Cirque du Soleil.
Yeah.
Yeah, a bunch of different troops get together.
In your household.
In your household, they were essentially the entertainment troupe.
You patronized them, and you fed them, and and so people in the court, they did have a little choir, that could perform this stuff, but a country teenager
would not have that. But he could have been part of it. So who?
No, I think he was. I haven't figured out the connection, but I think he was just somebody knew him, and he was paid to use his name because to publish was beneath this guy that was.
And do we speculate who this guy was?
Who Thomas Weelkes was? Well,
the actual.
Who wrote it?
Yeah.
I think Edward de Vere wrote it as the music for the early plays.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's that. I should add. That's a secondary kind of an add-on theory to the Oxfordian theory. I think it's an interesting one. I personally don't know enough to go one way or the other, but I saw the show Fa La La last night, and I think if it comes to your town, I urge people to check it out because it's really great. I mean, it's so. Elizabetherial.
So what it's but you said that it's a cello rock.
Well, so the music was published for vocalists, but alternately viol consort. Which was an early form of cello. So they intended this music could be played by 5 cellists or 5 singers, but we've combined it, and we are 5 singing cellists.
Oh my God! I need to see it.
And we have a drummer. And some of the stuff we do very straight as it's written.
Okay.
And some of it I've rearranged and refashioned, and it's very exciting. And even though it's so old, like it's just such old music, I felt like we did something really new last night.
It felt very current, yeah.
Is the Fallout a new production, like a new piece?
Yeah, I would call it a
guys?
work in progress. Last night. Yeah.
So what other shows have you put up with your group?
Rasputina has existed as a band for about 20 years.
Okay.
I toured with Nirvana as their cellist on their last tour.
Sweet.
I'm
that's
the
amazing.
Original rock cellist.
Okay. One of the original rock. You would say you're it?
I'm definitely a pioneer.
That's awesome. I love the cello. Is one of my favorite instruments.
It's a gorgeous thing. It's kept me captivated all these years. My lifetime.
Did you start very young?
Yeah, I started piano at 5 and cello at 9. And, then I went to art school, and I think a lot of...
Did you grow up here in New York? Or?
I grew up in Kansas.
In Kansas? Wow, where in Kansas?
Came here on a tornado.
Oh, yeah, exactly. You leave your shoes.
Emporia, Kansas.
Emporia, Kansas. Very nice. Well, no, I don't know it. I've never done stand-up in Kansas. It's one of the only states in the union I've never been to. I've driven through it. Actually, I've driven through it, had a flat tire, 4 different full pickup trucks stopped. They all had full Craftsman socket sets. Yeah, they were very helpful, very sweet people. It does help to be white.
Yeah.
Helps to be a nice white lady. And but it was that's cool. So you toured with Nirvana. And then
my group toured with Rasputina toured with Marilyn Manson. Back at his peak of notoriety, and we were on Sony for a couple records, and it's always been Rasputina. Yeah.
Okay, so people should look for those albums. And
yeah, we've got lots of albums.
And you're still touring, obviously, because
Yep.
you're here in New York City.
Yep.
What are some dates in February?
February, nothing. In March, we're playing something nice at the Philadelphia Museum of Art for an outsider art show.
Okay.
And I'm going to do a special collection of, I have a lot of songs that are kind of about outsider characters. So I'm going to do my outsider characters songs.
Sweet.
And we're playing at Irving Plaza in the city at the end of March and in Boston, I think.
Okay. And is it Rasputina.com?
Yeah.
Okay. So people should just check that for the schedule anyway, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And your book on Amazon.
Yeah, Shakespeare by Another Name.
Can you also get it as a paperback?
You can get it in paper version and e-version all through the website shakespearebyanother.name.com.
Right on.
There's a very active Facebook discussion group that you can go to through that website. It's called Shakespeare.
I love to hang out there because it is so hardcore. It is so
it's a dork forest all of its own.
It is deep into the details.
That's so
and
great.
I have bored my husband with this.
Two tears.
Yeah. The first time I talked to Mark, we were doing an interview on the phone. It was, I got to talk to an authority. It was the first time I talked to anybody who really knew anything about this. Oh my God, it was a time of my life.
It is kind of awesome just to sit down and really just root around in the thing that you love.
Yeah.
That's so great. What are some of your favorite works of Shakespeare?
I haven't read that much Shakespeare or seen that much Shakespeare. The sonnets I do.
Those are your favorites, you were saying.
And this music is so intense and so much work. Like, I've just had to work on this music.
Sure. It's, do you have a favorite sonnet that I should maybe read? Can you think of one?
They're short. Is it 100? Is it 100?
There's 154 of them. You meant like how many sonnets are there? Yeah, there's 154.
Okay.
I'm going to look up one.
You pulled up a book.
Yeah, I pulled up
His own.
The complete works?
His own.
Oh, Shakespeare by Another. Holy criminy. I was hoping it was smaller than that.
That was a fat one.
Well, although I had, this is a battle, folks. There are plenty of people who want to say that we're just, we don't know what we're talking about, blah, blah, blah. So this is endnotes and supplemental material, because I have to, when making the story, when telling the story of de Vere as Shakespeare, you've got to be able to defend every single statement you make, or you're going to be attacked.
Right.
And so I did that.
Okay.
But the story itself it reads like a novel. I mean, it is cradle to grave, and he led the most Shakespearean life you could imagine. But he also writes about his own sort of alienation.
Very small.
He writes about
very dense book. I promise I'll read it.
But I mean, he writes, and I'm going to see if I can find like Sonnet 72 would be a good example, where he's talking about this. He, being Shakespeare, the author of the sonnets, is talking about how his name is going to be lost. I mean, he says it right there in his works, and I'm just see if I can find it. You go ahead and talk to amongst yourselves while I dig this one out. It's a good example.
I'm a rock musician, and usually rock musicians come from being a fan.
Yeah.
Like, I want to have that audience, or I want to be like John Lennon, my idol, or usually they do. But since I originally came from classical music and I went to art school, it was more like an experiment in rock for me that I just fell into that worked. So I never came from being a fan. But this Edward de Vere subject, I'm a real fan for the first time. Like, I bought the photo book from the movie, and
is that what sort of got you into it? Because I mean, you've been playing music of a sort, like of that age, for some time, or is this new as well?
It happened kind of at the same time that I became interested in William Byrd, who is a very respected Renaissance composer. Okay, and I wanted to study that music and get some of those ideas into me for my own music. Okay. Like, I'm going to do some Renaissance influence. Yeah. And then really at the same time, beautiful synchronicity. Yeah. I saw the movie and read his book, and it all came together.
It all came together. Yeah. That is amazing. It's,
there is a God.
There is a God, and we are talking to him. So this is really fascinating. It's okay. Did you find it?
Well, I have an excerpt of some of these sonnets, and because my book, I had to basically not only tell de Vere's life, but then bring in the entire Shakespeare canon to it, because every single one of these plays are just little glimpses, little aspects of his life. You can only do this with one person. This is, this goes so far beyond the level of coincidence, like Orson Welles said. Mm-hmm. So anyway, so here's, like some examples from some of the sonnets. Sonnet 72, he says, after my death, dear love, forget me quite, unless you would devise, these are just some excerpts, unless you would devise some virtuous lie, my name be buried where my body is, and live no more to shame, nor me, nor you. For I am shamed by that which I bring forth, and so should you to love things nothing worth. So the author is saying, my name is buried where my body is. My name will be lost forever, though my works will live on. That's what the author of the Shakespeare sonnets is saying, and
there's so
to me,
he said shame like 3 times, and it's kind of involved with the work, like I brought shame with my trifles and my lowly public, because like to be involved in the theater was like low class.
It's.
Did you guys see My Favorite Year?
Yeah, I love that movie.
It's a great movie. Peter O'Toole, Mark Lindbaker.
Yeah.
And at one point, Peter O'Toole is hanging on a rope, and these 2 guys, he says, the Peter O'Toole character, I can't remember his name, he goes, he's beneath us. He goes, yes. He's just hanging on a rope. And so
Peter O'Toole would be a good de Vere.
Yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah. That's, so what would you, you have inspired me. You have inspired me.
Oh, fantastic.
Yeah. What, the last question mark is, how did it, so you read in college, obviously, you read Shakespeare. You studied Shakespeare as a writer.
I came to it after college, really. I mean, I am a dork twice over. I'm a Shakespeare dork, but also a science dork. So,
I'm an orchestra dork.
Yeah.
Exactly. Marching band.
They are all really dorky.
They are pretty.
But yeah, so when I first, in like in 1993 or so, I first came upon the story of de Vere as Shakespeare, and I had read some Shakespeare in college, and just, I'd seen some of the plays and seen some of the movie adaptations, but it was really only when I discovered de Vere's story and just the tremendous connection to be had, that I really went and just dove full fathom 5 into the whole canon.
That makes perfect sense.
Because I'm kind of a DVD extras dork. Like I love, I love getting the DVD and then going to the other stuff and then hearing from the screenwriter and the director like this. But what really happened in this movie and the reason this movie came about was, and it's like, oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah.
Did you go to England and look at the real papers, or what was
especially Italy. I think Shakespeare, from an Oxfordian perspective, becomes so much more continental. He's not just Shakespeare of England; he's Shakespeare of Renaissance Europe. Okay. And in a way, and essentially from an Oxfordian point of view, Shakespeare becomes the distillation of the Italian Renaissance into England. Okay. Because he is importing the commedia dell'arte, which is the reigning kind of theatrical style of the age. He's bringing that to England.
And the Madrigals are exactly the same. It was an Italian form of music that he brought, I believe, from Italy to England, and made English culture, and made, really great English culture that still is respected today. That's, fantastic. The stuff he brought back and made it their own.
Okay. That is amazing. All right. This has been the best hour. You guys, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you. It was a blast.
All right.
Thank you, Jackie.
My hat, my hat, my hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat, my hat, my hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?